بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قال تعالى في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله نور السماوات والأرض مثل نوره كمشكاة فيها مصباح المصباح في زجاجة الزجاجة كأنها كوكب دري يوقد من شجرة مباركة زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار نور على نور يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس والله بكل شيء عليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight we celebrate the auspicious occasion of the birth of Lady Fatima Zahra alayha salam. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about the purified soul that is Lady Fatima alayha salam. In Ziyarat Jami'ah, the ziyarah that is recommended to be recited in the presence of any one of the infallibles, whether it is the Prophet or the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, we read the following clause. We read the following. It says, خَلَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ أَنْوَارًا فَجَعَلَكُمْ بِعَرْشِهِ مُحْدِقِينَ. And this is a description of the 14 infallibles. That when God created you, He created you and your existence before this physical, worldly existence, you maintained an existence in the form of light, in the form of illumination. And that when He created you in the form of light and illumination, He kept you within close reach, within close vicinity of His arsh, of His celestial realm. And it was not until God decided to bless this universe, this world that He created, that He brought them into physical existence. So their existence, which is described in the ziyarah, predates their worldly existence. So in essence, their spirits were created, and they were created in the form of light, in the form of illumination, and that's also a reference to their divine guidance. And then came the bodily form, and then came the bodily manifestation. So, some of us, we're familiar with, and in talking about the concept of the birth of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, some of us are familiar with the narrations that describe the origins of her existence. And that the Prophet had a heavenly experience. And during that experience, Jibreel brought to the Prophet something to eat, fruits from heaven. Now, some narrations mention them as dates, others as an apple. But whatever it was that the Prophet consumed, according to the Prophet, peace be upon him himself, is that what he consumed created the generative matter, which in turn was the procreative matter that created Lady Fatima alayhi salam. So from the beginning, her existence, even before her birth into this world, she was a light from heaven. She was of the heaven. Narrations tell us that Lady Khadija alayhi salam, her blessed mother, and we know that when Lady Khadija had decided to marry the Prophet, that she did so at a cost, that people looked at her differently, that some of the women of Quraysh, of that tribe of Mecca, they decided to excommunicate her from their inner circles. And so she was left alone, because they saw her and they saw the wealth that she had and where she came from, and they couldn't understand why she had chosen to marry someone who was poor financially and also was an orphan. They did not see that the Prophet was very rich in spirit, was rich in character, was rich in integrity. Those are things that she saw, and she got to know of him because she trusted him with her financial dealings and her business. But what people could only see was the outside. And so the price that Lady Khadija had to pay was that she was ostracized from the community. And when she bore Lady Fatima, when she was pregnant with her in her womb, the Prophet says that I would enter into the chambers of Khadija and I would hear her speaking, but I wouldn't see anybody present. And I would ask her, who are you speaking to? There's nobody present. Am I missing something? Was somebody just here and I didn't see them? I didn't catch them? And Lady Khadija would respond, no, nobody's been here. But I hear the baby in my womb speaking to me, comforting me, keeping me company, keeping me busy. Whereas people have left me and abandoned me, she is keeping me company. She is giving me comfort. So narrations tell us about the existence of Lady Fatima before her bodily existence into this world, that she had a very blessed existence. Now, when you realize that Lady Fatima alayhi salam, her original matter that she was created from was from the heavens. And when you couple that with the idea that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam are an extension of who their mother was, their father, and also who their mother was. And when you couple that with the narration, there's a narration that describes the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as an extension of the Imams. In what aspect? One narration says, Shi'atuna minna, our Shia, our followers, they are from us. Khuliqu min fadli tinatina. That they were created from the leftovers of the generative matter that we were created from. Now the word is teen, which is clay, which is mentioned in the Quran, clay or dirt. What the Imam is implying here is that you, as a follower of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you have the honor of being created from the leftover matter of the Prophet, of the Imams themselves. And so it's important to know this fact, and it's important to talk about this because we need to realize where we come from. So many people in the world, they forget where they come from. They forget about the legacy of their ancestors. They forget who they descend from and where they descend from. And while most of the followers of Ahlul Bayt do not descend from the Ahlul Bayt biologically, however, there is a spiritual connection there. And it's a very deeply rooted spiritual connection. In other narrations, the relationship between the Prophet and the Imams and the followers of the Imams are explained in a different way. It's said that the Prophet, if you were to study the example of the tree, the Prophet represents the roots of that tree. The Imams represent the trunk and the branches of that tree. And the followers of Ahlul Bayt represent the leaves of that tree. And the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt represents the fruit of that tree. So there's a very deep connection with where we come from, not just biologically, but spiritually as well. Think about it. If you were to ask most people who their ancestors were, most people can only name up to maybe their great-grandfather or their great-great-grandfather. But spiritually, most of us know where we come from. And that's a blessing. It's a blessing to be deeply rooted in that fashion. Yesterday, I began reading a book, and I wanted to share this with you because I thought it just has so much semblance with what we're talking about here. For those of you who are familiar with the sport of rugby. Now, I promise I'm not going on a tangent here. I'm going to bring it back. But, rugby is a very rough sport, and it's played mainly in Commonwealth countries. So in the UK, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, those countries. And this book is about one of the most, or rather the most successful team in rugby, which is the New Zealand All Blacks. And so this author who wrote the book, he went and he lived with them and he observed this winning team. What made them different than every other team? Why is it that they consecutively win the Rugby World Cup? So he studied their culture. He studied how they trained. He studied how they spoke, what they did even in the locker rooms, what they did on the off season, how they thought. And it's interesting because if you've ever seen them play, whenever they go out into the field, if it's an important game, what the team performs is something called a haka. Now, a haka is a ceremonial display. It's a ceremonial dance which originates in the Maori culture. The Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. So just like how here in the United States, we have the Native Americans, and in Canada, the First Nations, and in Australia, the Aborigines. In New Zealand, they're referred to as the Maori, and they originate from the Polynesian islands. They migrated to New Zealand in the 1300s. And so the haka is a display that is normally performed in weddings, in funerals, and more recently, it's been appropriated into sporting events, graduations, and any sort of people gatherings. Some of you may have seen a couple of years ago when that tragic shooting happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, how when it came time to mourn all of those Muslims that were lost, the lives that were lost, how there was a display, a very emotional display, the haka that was performed for them. And so the point behind that is to display, and obviously the Maori for many years and until today live as tribes. And so when one tribe wanted to display their strength and their courage and their unity, they get together and they perform this haka. And so bringing it back to the discussion of the New Zealand All Blacks, is that what the book was describing is that when they go out there and they perform in front of the other team, essentially what they're doing is they're trying to get into the mind of the other team. And the other team, sometimes they will either stand in place, or they will move forward, or they will retreat. But what he was saying, the author, was very interesting, is that depending on how the the opposite team reacts, they can tell whether they are going to win or lose. So what they call upon when they're chanting during this display is they call upon the strength of their ancestors. Think about it. This is something which is so unorthodox. You don't really see this happen in any other sport, in soccer or football or basketball. But for them, it's rooted within the culture of their country. And this is why they win year after year after year. Because they know where they come from. They know the culture that they descend from. They know that when they're on the field, it's not just them on the field. It's as if their ancestors are there with them on the field. And so they become endowed with a great source of inspiration and confidence on the field, because they know what they're attached to. The reason I bring this up, my friends, is because as we read the description of the followers of Ahlul Bayt, that we come from the same, essentially from the same generative matter, that spiritually that biologically we may not be descendants, all of us, of the Ahlul Bayt, but spiritually we are counted as their descendants. We are an extension. We are the branches of that tree. And so that should give us a great sense of pride. It should give us a great sense of confidence when we are out there in the world. And I say that because, especially in this day and age, especially in the time of social distancing, that it's easy to feel as if we are alone and lonely. It's easy to feel like we are in isolation and to forget where we came from and to feel alone. Every single one of us is unique. Some of you know about the architect. There was a famous architect and visionary. His name was Buckminster Fuller. And some of you may be familiar with some of his works. And he went through a time in his life where he was very depressed and he was contemplating suicide. But what saved him was the following thought. And I want to share this quote from him. He asked himself the following question. He said, what is my job on the planet? Why did God put me here? If you read about the statistics, they say the statistics for you existing in this world is 1 in, I don't know, billions or trillions or something magnificent like that. That the way that you exist right now, with your physical qualities, being born into the family that you're born into, with all the attributes and characteristics and where you are geographically in the world is 1 in billions or 1 in trillions. So he asked the question, what is my job on the planet? What is it that needs doing? What is it that this world needs that I know something about? For instance, I'm a specialist in that probably won't happen unless I take responsibility for it. All of us have to ask ourselves this question. Every single one of us is gifted. We're unique. We need to ask ourselves, what is it in this world that is so special and important that I know more about than most people, that if I don't do this thing, if I don't take on the responsibility, it's not going to get done. And I promise you, there's a place for all of us in this world to do amazing things, to do great things. That was what the Imams wanted us to know. So, a little bit on how the Quran describes Lady Fatima alayhi salam. All of us, we know the shortest verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Kawthar, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar. And it's addressing the Prophet that, Ya Rasulullah, we have given you Kawthar, which in Arabic means abundance. We've blessed you with abundance. We've given you abundance. And most of us know the backstory behind this, how the Prophet within his life, obviously he had daughters. He had Lady Fatima alayhi salam, and according to other reports, Lady Zainab and Ruqayya and Kulthum. There's a debate whether they were his biological daughters or not. But the Prophet's sons, his male children, his sons, all of them did not live beyond a few years. And so in that Arab society, that patriarchal society, if a man did not have boys, then that's it. His legacy was basically cut off. And so one of the ways that people would try to insult the Prophet was to insult him by attacking the fact that his sons would never survive beyond a few years, and that, after him, he's not going to really have a meaningful legacy. And one of those people was Al-As bin Wa'il, the father of Amr ibn al-As. Al-As bin Wa'il used to refer to the Prophet as Al-Abtar. Al-Abtar means the one who is cut off, meaning his lineage is cut off. And that would hurt the Prophet. Those words, they were insulting to the Prophet. And so God reminds the Prophet that we have given you abundance. And according to narrations, that abundance came in the form of a daughter, not a son. It came in the form of Lady Fatima alayhi salam. Lady Fatima represents abundance. She represents a source of abundance in the life of the Prophet, but not only in the life of the Prophet, in the life of us as well. So she is a gift that God has given to us. There's a story that further explains this, the relationship between the Prophet and his daughter and the Imams that came after. And it's said that one day during the life of Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, and this story is mentioned by Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha. And we all know Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili was not a follower of the Ahl al-Bayt, he was not a Shi'i, but he wrote a commentary on Nahj al-Balagha. And he mentions the following. He says that one day during the life of the second Imam, Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, who lived for most of his life in Medina, towards the end of his life especially, that Ziyad ibn Abi, now we all know Ziyad ibn Abi as basically the right-hand man of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And he's referred to as Ziyad ibn Abi, Ziyad, son of his father. You're talking about lineage. He didn't really know who his father was. In fact, when he was born, there were 6 different men who claimed him as their son, one of them being Abu Sufyan. And so Ziyad ibn Abi starts to make trouble for some of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. There was one in particular who was a prominent man in Medina, and because he had chosen to follow Al-Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, they confiscated from him his belongings, his properties. And so Al-Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, he writes a letter to Ziyad. Now Ziyad, even though his father was not known, he didn't like the fact that people called him Ziyad ibn Abi, Ziyad, the son of his father. He wanted to be referred to as Ziyad ibn Abi Sufyan, Ziyad, the son of Abu Sufyan. But who knows? Abu Sufyan wasn't his father. I mean, we don't really know. He could have been, but there were no DNA tests back then. So we couldn't really know. So when he writes the letter, he writes from, Al-Imam al-Hasan is introducing himself. He says, from Al-Hasan ibn Ali. Everybody knows who the father of Imam Hassan was. To Ziyad ibn Abi, Ziyad, son of his father. So he writes that letter. He says, I request that you stop, you give back this man. He's one of our followers. And I request that you give him back what you have confiscated from him and stop harassing him. Now, Ziyad, reading the title of the letter, completely forgets about the content. So listen to this. He tries to return now the Imam is not insulting him. He's basically stating what is the truth. Your father is not known. Everybody used to refer to him as Ziyad ibn Abi. Ziyad, when he responds to the Imam, he tries to insult him. What does he say? He says, from Ziyad to Al-Hasan ibn Fatima. And you know what he's trying to suggest here. He's trying to suggest something very harsh and insidious. Now, the news gets to Muawiyah. So Muawiyah writes a letter to Ziyad. He says, first of all, he says, do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who you're trying to insult? He said, if anybody is going to insult this man, you should be the last one in line. He says that, and then he said, number one, and then he says, number two, if you're actually going to insult him, you dummy, don't say Al-Hasan ibn Fatima. He says, you're undoing everything that we're trying to do. We're trying to separate between Al-Hasan and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By mentioning his mother's name, you're not insulting him. You're doing the exact opposite. You are honoring him. Because everybody knows how close Fatima alayhi salam was to her father, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I just wanted to share that with you in terms of how even those people who opposed the Ahlul Bayt, they realized how strong that bond was between Lady Fatima alayhi salam and her father, the Prophet. And so just to wrap this up, talking about Lady Fatima as a gift. She was a gift to the world. She was a gift to her father. Her father would refer to her as Ummu Abiha, the mother of her father, because she was so nurturing, she was so caring, she was so loving. And we know that the Prophet, his father passed away before he was born, and his mother passed away when he was young. And so he missed out on, yes, he did have Halima Sa'diyah who nursed him, but nothing comes close to the care of a biological mother. Nothing replaces that. And a biological father, of course. But here we're talking about mother. So the Prophet used to refer to her as Ummu Abiha, the mother of her father, because she loved her father as if he was her own son, as if he was her own child. That's how she took care of him. In a narration, it describes why she is referred to as Fatima, because it says, So the word Fatima comes from a verb, Fatama, which means to wean. So when a child is weaned from breastfeeding from his mother, that verb is Fatima. And it describes her name as Fatima for the following reason. She was given that name by God because she weans her followers from the hellfire. She separates her followers from the hellfire. لأنها فطمت شيعتها من النار وفطمت أعداءها من الجنة. And she does the same for her enemies, for her opponents, those who oppressed her and continue to oppress her. She separates them from heaven, the way a baby is separated from its nursing mother. Another report says that the reason she is given that honor and she is given that title is because on the day of judgment, she will pick out her followers, the people who loved her, the people who believe in her. She will pick them out from the crowd the same way a bird picks out good seed from bad seed. If you've ever fed a bird, if you toss seeds in front of it, it knows intuitively which seeds are good and which ones are not. And it picks out the good seeds and it leaves behind the bad seeds. To wrap up, I just want to talk about a couple of things that Lady Fatima alayhi salam left behind for us in terms of rituals and what we can practice. Number one, we all know about the ritual of Tasbih Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And after every prayer, we recite 34 times Allahu Akbar, 33 times Alhamdulillah, and 33 times Subhanallah. This was a gift, a practice that the Prophet taught Lady Fatima so that she would not feel overpowered, she would not feel overburdened physically and emotionally and mentally. Because it's easy in our day-to-day life to feel overburdened. If it's not physical, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's psychological. This is one thing that we practice after every prayer. The second, and I've seen this work like a miracle, it's referred to as Salat Fatima, the prayer of Fatima. It's mentioned in Mafatih al-Jinan, for those of you who want to practice it. Whenever you find yourself in a predicament, whenever you find yourself between a rock and hard place, whenever you find yourself struggling and you want you're looking for a breakthrough, you're looking for something to happen and open up the doors of blessings in your life and the removal of obstacles, do this prayer, Salat Fatima. And the narration says that this was a prayer that the angel Jibreel himself taught her, which is the following. It's a 2-unit prayer, just like your morning prayer. It's a 2-unit prayer. In the first unit, you recite Surah Al-Fatiha once, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then after that, Surah Al-Qadr, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr, 100 times. So that's in the first rak'ah, Surah Al-Fatiha once, and then Surah Inna anzalnah 100 times. In the second rak'ah, it's Surah Al-Hamd, Surah Al-Fatiha, and then Surah Al-Tawheed, Qul huwa Allahu ahad. So just like a regular rak'ah. Once you're done with the prayer, there's a very short dua. It's about a paragraph long, which is recited. And then you follow that up with 100 times, 100 salawat. So Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, 100 times. And it works. I've seen it work for some of the, some of the biggest challenges that I've seen people face open up in front of them because they offered this prayer. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward us. We are on the doors of the months of Rajab and Sha'ban, and pretty soon after that, Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open up the doors of mercy and forgiveness for us during these months. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asri inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bil sabr. Wassalamu alaykum.